There is a Paris of postcards and poetry, a city of light, of grand boulevards and whispered romance. But there is another Paris, a city of shadows that cling to the narrow, winding streets of its working-class neighborhoods, a city of silent courtyards and dimly lit landings. This is a story from that other Paris, a story that begins not with a gunshot or a scream, but with a silence, a specific, chilling silence that fell over the eastern arrondissement for 7 long years. This is the story of a hunt, a story of a city held hostage by fear, and the man who became its most terrifying ghost, Guy Georges, the beast of the Bastille. To tell this story completely, we must not simply recount the crimes. We must inhabit the era, understand the investigation's desperate labyrinth, and stare into the abyss of a killer's mind. This is a chronicle of how a monster is forged, how he operates in plain sight, and how a small, dedicated group of men and women refuse to let the light be extinguished. The story of a monster is always, in part, the story of a child. Guy Georges was born on November 12, 1962, in Les Andelys, Normandy. The town, picturesque with its medieval castle overlooking the Seine, was a lie in his case. A beautiful setting for a deeply dysfunctional childhood. His mother, Marcelle, worked as a cleaner. She was a woman worn down by life, emotionally distant, offering not warmth but a kind of weary, pragmatic care. His stepfather, a former soldier from the Algerian War named Georges, was a stern, unyielding disciplinarian. The home was not a haven. It was a boot camp where affection was a foreign language and obedience was the only currency. Young Guy was a square peg in a round world. He struggled severely in school. He was dyslexic in an era that had little understanding or patience for the condition. His intelligence was there, but it was a feral, untamed thing, expressing itself as cunning and manipulation rather than academic achievement. He couldn't read the words in his books, but he became an expert at reading the weaknesses in those around him. By the age of 12, he was a known thief, pilfering from local shops. By 15, he was assaulting other children, a bully whose rage was already seeking an outlet. The first major, undeniable eruption of the monster within occurred on the night of October 26, 1979. Guy Georges was 17. He lay in wait near a dance hall in Val de Reuil, a neighbouring town. He spotted a young woman, 19-year-old Nadine Fif, her identity protected by French law, walking home alone. He followed her, then pounced. He dragged her into a nearby field. What followed was a brutal, premeditated rape at knife point. This was not a crime of sudden, impulsive passion. It was a blueprint. It contained all the core elements of his future modus operandi: the stalking, the ambush, the use of a blade to terrorize, the sexual violence as an act of domination. His arrest was swift, but the response of the system was a catastrophic failure of foresight. The psychiatric report prepared for the court was chillingly accurate. The expert, Dr. Jean-Pierre Bouchard, described a young man with a perverse and impulsive sexual instinct, marked by a profound emotional coldness and a total absence of empathy. The report concluded with a stark warning: he presents an extreme dangerousness and a high risk of recurrence. Incarceration is the only way to protect society. The court, however, saw a juvenile. He was sentenced but to a youth detention centre, not a hardened prison. It was a revolving door. The 1980s became a lost decade, a carousel of crime and incarceration. He was in and out of some of France's most notorious prisons: the youth facility at Armingen, then Mozac, Fleury-Mérogis, and the Centrale de Melun. Prison was his university. Here, he was not the struggling dyslexic. He was a strong, cunning young man who commanded respect through fear. He learned from older, more sophisticated criminals. He perfected his skills in lock-picking and breaking and entering. He hardened physically, spending hours weightlifting, but most importantly, his psyche hardened. His hatred for women, his sense of being fundamentally wronged by the world, festered in the toxic environment of the penitentiary. Each release was not a rehabilitation, it was a field test. In 1988, he raped another woman, following a near-identical pattern to his first crime. Again, the sentence was lenient, a few more years added to his cycle. He was released on February 11, 1991. He was 28 years old. The system had finished its work. It had taken a dangerous young man and returned a polished, fully operational predator to society. He had no skills, no prospects, and a bottomless well of rage. He packed a bag, said a perfunctory goodbye to his mother in Normandy, and boarded a train to Paris. The beast was coming to the city. Paris, in the early 1990s, was a city in transition. The grand renovations of the Mitterrand era were underway, but the Eastern arrondissement, the 11th, 12th, 20th, retained their gritty working-class charm. They were villages within the city, a labyrinth of narrow streets, bustling markets, and dense housing. For Guy Georges, it was the perfect hunting ground. He found a room in a small, shabby hotel in the 11th arrondissement and, through a temporary work agency, found employment as a mover. The job was a gift from the gods of chaos. It explained his powerful physique, his knowledge of the city's layout, his presence in the stairwells and courtyards of countless apartment buildings. He became a ghost in the urban machinery, invisible precisely because he was so ordinary. And then the hunt began. His methodology was not that of a frenzied, disorganized killer. It was the work of a meticulous, patient, and highly organized predator. His ritual was a 5-act play of terror, refined with each new victim. We will now walk through this ritual in forensic detail. Phase 1, the selection, the stalker. He did not choose at random. He was a predator who understood his ecosystem. He prowled the streets of the 11th and 12th arrondissement on a black Peugeot SC SX scooter or on foot, his eyes constantly cataloguing, assessing. He sought a specific profile: young women, often between 19 and 35, students, secretaries, shop assistants, women who lived alone or appeared to. He looked for specific types of apartments: ground-floor units with windows facing the street or a courtyard, apartments with balconies accessible from internal landings or drain pipes, or top-floor units with old, vulnerable skylights. He was an architect of vulnerability, studying building layouts for structural weaknesses as an engineer would. Phase 2, the surveillance, the student. Once a target was selected, the real work began. He became a full-time student of her life. For days, sometimes weeks, he watched. He would park his scooter a few streets away and observe. He noted what time she came home from work, what groceries she bought, when her lights went out, if she had a cat to let out, if she had a boyfriend who stayed over on weekends. He learned her rhythm, her vulnerabilities, the tiny, mundane details that made up her existence. He was not just stalking a person, he was memorizing a script for a play in which he would be the sole violent author. Phase 3, the intrusion, the phantom. The strike always came in the witching hour, between 4 and 7 a. The city was at its most silent, and the human body is at its deepest, most vulnerable point of sleep. Using skills honed during his years in prison, he gained entry with terrifying efficiency. A simple screwdriver to silently pop a window latch, a thin, flexible wire to slide a balcony door lock from the inside, climbing a drain pipe or a stack of crates to an open skylight. He was a phantom, crossing the sacred threshold from the public street into the most private of spaces, the bedroom. He often wore gloves and would sometimes slip plastic bags over his shoes. Phase 4, the assault, the beast. This is where the carefully maintained control shattered, revealing the raw, sadistic fury beneath. He would often first cover the victim's head with a blanket, a pillow, or her own duvet. This was both to disorient her and, perversely, to avoid seeing her face, to maintain the fantasy of her as an object rather than a human being. The sexual assaults were acts of ultimate domination, of hatred and power made flesh. And then, the knife. He always carried the same type of weapon, a sturdy, fixed-blade hunting knife. The stabbings were not merely to kill, they were a frenzy of overkill, dozens of wounds, a chaotic, brutal punctuation mark to his rage. The crime scenes were not just murder sites, they were landscapes of annihilation, so violent they defied understanding, and left seasoned forensics experts and detectives physically ill. Phase 5, the disappearance, the ghost. His exit was as calculated as his entry. He would often take a small, macabre trophy, a piece of jewellery, a photograph from a frame, a tangible reminder of his power. He would then meticulously wipe down surfaces he might have touched, showing a chilling awareness of forensic techniques. Then he would slip back out the way he came, vanishing into the sleeping city. By the time the sun rose and the horrific discovery was made, he was already blending into the morning metro crowds, just another anonymous face on his way to a day of manual labour. Now we must give names and profound depth to this horror. We must remember the lives behind the headlines, the individual worlds he destroyed. Elizabeth Guillemot, 19, March 8, 1991. Rue de la Roquette, 11th arrondissement. Elizabeth was a secretary new to Paris, full of the optimism of a young woman building her life. She loved the cinema and wrote long letters to her family back in the provinces. Her murder was the first that fit the definitive signature. The investigation was initially local, a tragic, isolated murder. No one yet knew it was the opening chord in a symphony of terror. Hélène Frinking, 39, July 25, 1992, Hôtel de la Rue de Charonne, 11th arrondissement. Hélène was a respected psychologist from the Netherlands in Paris to attend a conference on cognitive behavioral therapy. She was intelligent, accomplished, and deeply compassionate. She checked into a small-budget hotel. Her murder signalled a shift. The killer was now targeting transients showing confidence. The Dutch press went into a frenzy, and the case gained its first international dimension. Catherine Rocher, September 24, 1992, Rue de la Folie Regnault, 11th arrondissement. Catherine was a vibrant, artistic soul who worked in a gallery. She was stabbed 27 times. The sheer, shocking number of wounds was a message written in blood. It was no longer just about murder, it was about obliteration. It was after Catherine's murder that detectives from the Brigade Criminelle began to seriously consider the possibility of a serial predator. Ivana Tranche, 21, December 5, 1992, Rue de la Pierre-Levée, 11th arrondissement. Ivana's case was initially attributed to a different, known criminal. It would take years and the miracle of DNA to correctly place her on the list of the beast's victims. Her story is a testament to the chaos he sowed and the initial inability of the police to connect the dots. Nathalie Lemeur, 21, January 8, 1994, Rue de la Forêt, Vincennes. A student beloved by her friends for her wicked sense of humour. Her murder in Vincennes, on the edge of Paris, showed the killer was expanding his territory, feeling the pressure in the Core arrondissement. The investigation, now officially a serial killer case, was put under the command of a single, determined magistrate, Judge Michel Debac. Patricia Sard, 31. March 16, 1994. Rue de l'Espérance, 13th arrondissement. Patricia was a mother. Her murder added a new, even more devastating layer to the tragedy. She had a young son. The public outrage grew. The press was now in a full-blown panic, and the name Beast of the Bastille was splashed across every front page. The pressure on the police became immense, a physical weight on the shoulders of every investigator. The man tasked with navigating this labyrinth was Judge Michel Debac, a career magistrate with a reputation for integrity and dogged determination. He was the legal brain of the investigation. Working in tandem with him was the operational muscle, Superintendent Pierre Ottavioli, a legendary figure from the Brigade de Recherche et d'Intervention, PRI, a man who had spent his life hunting the most dangerous criminals in France. Their task was Herculean. They were chasing a ghost. They had one crucial revolutionary clue: DNA. The killer had left his genetic signature, semen, skin cells under fingernails, at every scene. In the early 1990s, this was both a blessing and a curse. It was a scientific fingerprint, absolute and irrefutable, but France did not yet have a national DNA database. FENAIG would only be created in 1998. They had the key, but there was no lock to put it in. The investigation, now officially dubbed the GRP, Gang des Rippers de Paris, became a colossal, sprawling entity. They amassed over 5,000 suspect files. They conducted thousands of interviews. They pursued every possible angle. The pimp theory: was this a pimp punishing women who worked for him? The jilted lover theory: was it a man taking revenge on women who resembled a former lover? The satanic cult theory: the brutality of the crimes led some down this dark, speculative path. They were plagued by false confessions. Dozens of disturbed individuals came forward, claiming to be the beast. Each one had to be painstakingly investigated, each one draining precious time and resources. The pressure from the media was relentless. Headlines screamed of police incompetence. The fear among the public, particularly women in the affected arrondissement, was a palpable living thing. Women changed their lives. They installed iron bars on their windows, les grilles de la peur, the grids of fear. They took self-defense classes. They avoided going out alone after dark. They slept with knives or hammers under their pillows. The beast was not just a killer, he was a psychological weapon that had stolen the city's sense of security. A dedicated task force was set up in an unmarked office on Quai des Orfèvres. The walls were papered with maps of Paris, dotted with red pins marking each crime scene. Photographs of the victims, in life and in death, served as a constant grim reminder of what was at stake. The team worked 20-hour days, fueled by coffee, cigarettes, and grim determination. They were chasing a reflection, a man who seemed to know their methods as well as they did. He left no fingerprints. He seemed to have an uncanny knowledge of the city's back streets and blind spots, allowing him to vanish after each attack like mist in the morning sun. The break, when it came, was not from a high-tech revelation, but from a combination of old-fashioned, grinding police work and a single crucial witness. The beast's final attack came on February 6, 1997. The victim was Esther K., a 19-year-old German au pair living on Rue de l'Eure in the 14th arrondissement. She was new to Paris, full of excitement about learning French and exploring the city. Her murder was as brutal as the others, but this time there was a crack in the killer's armour. A neighbour, awakened by a strange noise, had glanced out her window. She saw a man fleeing the building. The description was rough. A man of average height, solid build, dark hair, wearing a dark jacket. He was moving quickly, but not running. It was a ghost, glimpsed for a fraction of a second. For Judge Debac and Superintendent Ottavioli, this was it. The pressure was now existential. They had to take a monumental gamble. They decided on a massive, targeted DNA dragnet, a technique still in its infancy, focusing on the 11th and surrounding arrondissement. They began identifying and legally compelling hundreds of men with previous convictions for sexual offences to provide a saliva sample. The operation was clandestine and massive. For weeks, men were quietly brought in, swabbed and released. The samples were sent to the forensic lab. It was a needle-in-a-haystack operation, and hope was fading. Then, on March 25, 1997, a lab technician cross-referenced a new sample with the one from the beast. The computer screen flashed a match. A perfect 100% match. The name attached to the sample was Guy Georges. The following morning, March 2006, 1997, a team of plainclothes officers from the BRI surrounded a small house in Saint-Pierre-les-Elbeuf, Normandy. It was the home of Guy Georges' mother. He was there, visiting. The arrest was anticlimactic. There was no struggle, no dramatic chase. He opened the door, saw the officers, and simply said, "C'est moi." It's me. He was calm, almost serene, as if a great weight had been lifted. The hunter had finally been caught. The interrogations that followed were a psychological duel. Initially, Georges was evasive, playing games, feigning memory loss, but faced with the irrefutable genetic evidence, the science that connected him inextricably to all 7 crime scenes, his facade crumbled. Over hours of intense questioning by Judge Debac, he began to confess. His confession was not accompanied by remorse. It was delivered with a chilling, matter-of-fact detachment. He described his stalking methods, his break-in techniques, the assaults, in graphic, horrifying detail. It was as if he were describing a day at work. He spoke of the women not as human beings, but as objects, types he had selected. He explained how he would sometimes sit in a café after a murder, watching the police arrive, feeling a sense of power and superiority. He was a craftsman discussing his craft. His trial, which began in March 2000, and won at the Palais de Justice in Paris, was one of the most dramatic and grotesque legal spectacles in modern French history. The courtroom was packed with journalists, victims' families, and the simply curious. Guy Georges, now 38, used this as his final stage. He was arrogant, smirking, and deliberately provocative. He insulted the victims' families, calling them vultures. He sang the socialist anthem L'Internationale at the top of his lungs to disrupt the proceedings. He described his atrocities in the most vulgar, shocking language possible, forcing the president of the court to repeatedly clear the room. It was a calculated performance designed to assert power, to shock, and to prove that, even in chains, he could still control the narrative. And through this maelstrom of hatred sat the families of the victims. Their testimonies were devastating portraits of a loss that was both profound and mundane. A father speaking of teaching his daughter to ride a bike, a sister describing the sound of a laughter that would never be heard again, a mother holding up a photograph of a grandchild her daughter would never have. Their quiet, dignified, and unimaginably painful grief in the face of his monstrous theatrics, was the most powerful indictment of all. The verdict was a foregone conclusion. On June 2006, 2001, after hours of deliberation, the court found Guy Georges guilty of all 7 murders. The sentence was life imprisonment with a période de sûreté, a safety period, of 22 years, the maximum possible at the time. As the sentence was read, Guy Georges showed no emotion. He had consumed the court's attention for weeks, and now the show was over. He was led away to begin his eternity in a cell. Guy Georges remains in prison today, his requests for parole repeatedly and unanimously denied. The beast of the Bastille was caged, but the scars he left are permanent. The investigation led by Debache and Ottavioli directly contributed to the creation and expansion of France's national DNA database, changing forensic science forever. But the true legacy lies in the silent spaces, the empty chairs at family dinners, the birthdays that are still days of mourning, the city of Paris, forever marked by those 7 years of fear. His story is a harrowing 5-hour lesson, a reminder that evil is not always a complex philosophical concept. Sometimes it is frighteningly simple: a man, a knife, a city asleep, and the terrifying capacity for darkness that can hide in the most ordinary of faces, waiting for the night to fall.